Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, January 13th, 2021, and I feel like we were doing the same thing last January, where it's impeachment day on Capitol Hill. I bet you didn't have that one down, although everyone knew that it was well-deserved. Events have accelerated in the last couple of days, and the House of Representatives will be meeting to vote on and pass, it is expected, impeachment articles against Donald Trump, who's only president for another week. We have, of course, been over and over the various questions of the timing involved in this, and we'll probably discuss it a little bit more, as Wednesday is our regularly scheduled visit from Greg Dworkin, but it being an emergency Wednesday, it's entirely possible we may be fielding calls from all over the place, and probably comments from all of you as well, so we'll try our best to work all of that in. The House, in very inconsiderate fashion, has decided to gavel in for business right about now, where they're scheduled for 9 a.m., directly opposite this show. It's really incredible that they haven't noticed yet that they should await instructions from us before beginning with these things. But they have a mind of their own. And, we'll see how they handle things. Greg and Armando are having a discussion just now off the air, though I guess we could have it on the air at some point. But we might just straighten it out even before it gets to that. Some discussion of the timing and some of the various options that we've discussed for the House vis-a-vis their interest in driving the timing in the Senate are not going as we thought they might. But then again, neither is the timing as laid out by some of the major players involved. You may have noticed yesterday, because you like news, that Mitch McConnell, I guess, did about as much as anyone could expect, other than committing to vote for impeachment, for conviction and removal. And that may yet come. We really just don't know. But he's expressed a clear openness to the idea and has, I think, left it at first at, I'd like to examine the articles of impeachment, and then we'll decide what's going on. He's already said he's not going to be whipping votes on the thing. The House, likewise, will not be whipping votes among the Republicans. That probably largely the work of Liz Cheney, who is the third-ranking Republican in the House Conference Chairman, House Republican Conference Chairperson. And she may say chairman. I really don't know what her own preference is, but we're supposed to be eliminating gendered language from House business anyway, which apparently, by the way, although it stirred a lot of controversy among the right, is something they've been doing for many, many years. And many of the new members, Republican members who came and complained about it, by the way, come from state legislatures where that's been the rule for most of their career. But anyway, who cares about that? There's an impeachment to take care of, and there was, of course, an attack on the Capitol, about which we are learning more every minute, and which I think is maybe driving some of this other news. We'll loop back. So Liz Cheney came out straight out and just said, yeah, I'm going to be voting for this impeachment resolution tomorrow. So that's a pretty big, political earthquake. It hasn't changed a whole lot of minds just yet on the record. There are still only 5 Republicans, but there are 5. So, of course, we have a genuinely bipartisan effort now, according to, the way the news media tends to measure these things. If Joe Lieberman voted for something with the Republicans, it was bipartisan. There are 5, and I don't think I can name them all because some of them are lesser known to me, but there are lists out there and articles that we can read, and they'll come up in discussion. But it's Liz Cheney, I recall Fred Upton, who's a longtime member of the House, not a particularly heavyweight in terms of leadership, but longtime House Republican. There are a couple others, a smattering of others. Most of them are parked in pocket. We could use a lot more, and there may yet be at least a few more. There is, of course, the hardcore of 100 and, was it 140 who voted for the objections to the Electoral College, so we have that to overcome. A lot of people changing their minds, though, as we noticed in the Senate on the day that it came their turn to settle things after the invasion of the Capitol. So I don't know. We'll see how this goes. So now the question, I guess, about timing is whether or not to send the articles of impeachment and the message appointing the House managers over to the Senate. That would pretty much automatically trigger their schedule-making decisions, but they still have to make the decision as to whether or not to bring the Senate back in session. A little bit different rules on the Senate side than on the House, but generally speaking, very understandable if you remember the House rules. The Senate Majority Leader, still Mitch McConnell, can, under emergency circumstances and in consultation with the Minority Leader, and the Minority Leader in this case would not be objecting to reconvening the Senate. They could, in fact, reconvene the Senate quickly now and try and hold a very quick trial and eliminate all questions about whether or not, even among the minds of conservative commentators and judges, at least one former judge anyhow, whether or not Trump can be impeached post after his departure from office, assuming that actually happens, though that would be a great capper. And you could impeach him while he's still technically president and foreclose any, I guess, very, very, very last-minute disasters, although that would just, I think, cause him to push the disasters up a little bit, but that's okay. This is all you can do, so you try and do it. Last night, the House did pass the resolution calling on the vice president, still Mike Pence, to invoke the 25th Amendment. He has answered, even answered before the vote, and said that he would not, which is incredible in its own right, but he's not going to do it. I really thought there was a moment there where he might embrace it once Cheney came out and pretty much made it clear that, all right, well, this is now a rallying point for anyone who will come. We're not sure who will, although you would think she would have done some vote counting. For the old guard, old school conservative Republicans. And there hasn't been a great rallying to that flag just yet, so we'll wait and see. But it was an opportunity for Pence to think about the 2024 nomination, in which I believe he is still interested. And I don't know whether Liz Cheney is or isn't, but I think most Cheneys are interested in seizing the reins of power. It's sort of part of their makeup. And so I think she becomes a legit contender if she wants it. And I got to tell you, the rapidity with which the Trump legacy might just collapse when all this is said and done, regardless of the outcome of the impeachment, actually, suggests that if the trend continues and people are ready to distance themselves from Trump, that Cheney may have boxed Pence out on the presidential nominating race next time. And the idea that he has put all his eggs in one basket, so to speak, and has bet all in now on his entirely uncharismatic ability to carry the now disintegrating Trump mantle. Seems like a very poor bet, but whatever. He's placed it, and that's that. So, all right, now we start to question whether or not the impeachment message and appointment of the House managers ought to be sent to the Senate right away, whether it makes any difference, whether Mitch McConnell is going to commit to any sort of schedule, and that's still up in the air. So lots of question marks, but I think the House is going to do what it's going to do, and it's going to start doing it now. So let's let Greg begin. Nothing, no laundry running or anything. You can just want to jump right in.
Not yet, you know,
Okay.
and Abby,
I mean, if you want to put
is
some in,
well
that's fine.
positioned. She's eyeing
Good.
the TV, trying to tell me if anything happens while we're speaking.
Excellent. I have nothing
But, you know, you have to
for that.
ask the very important question, who made a worse bet? Pence, who put all his eggs in a basket that doesn't exist,
Yes.
or Cruz and Hawley,
Oh, yeah.
who,
Well,
of course, have the
Yeah.
opportunity to pivot to, well, of course you should impeach him. I want to position myself for 2024.
Yeah.
And therefore, I need all of America with me. We know this because we actually have polling on this. So there's a bunch of raft
as weird as it
polling, as you
seems,
like
they
to
could
say.
pull it off, I think.
Trump's approval rating craters in final days, says Politico, with a new Morning Consult poll today. After 4 years of stability, the outgoing president's poll numbers have reached new lows following last week's Capitol insurrection.
Wow.
Tarnished by last week's riot, Trump is ending his presidency with his lowest ever poll numbers. And, of course, another week to go. A new Politico Morning Consult poll pegs Trump's approval at just 34, lowest in 4 years. More than 6 in 10 voters disapprove, and that matches other polls conducted over the past week, which Democrats and some Republicans say Trump incited with the riots with his false and bellicose rhetoric about the 2020 presidential election.
Yes,
and we note that, of course, things have been stable. The other poll that came out today that shows the same thing is Navigator. Key takeaways. More than 4 in 5 opposed Trump supporters breaking into the Capitol, with more than 3 in 5 describing themselves as horrified and shocked. But those are Trump supporters. It's clear it's Trump supporters. Right?
Only
it's
dentists
not Antifa, it's
no,
Trump supporters.
And we now know, by the way, Paul Gosar is that 5th dentist.
Yeah.
Now we figured it out.
The Gosar, Andy Biggs, and
he's a dentist, isn't he?
Who's the other one?
Gay Hitler was a dentist.
Oh, Mo Brooks have been fingered as potentially showing people around and giving them.
I'm wondering about that. Yes.
Scouting trips to get an idea what's going on. Ayanna Presley's staff report that when they were hiding in the office, the panic buttons had been removed.
Yes, very mysterious, that.
Very mysterious. So there's a whole bunch of questions that still need to be answered. But clearly these were Trump supporters. Majorities of Americans support removing Trump from office before his term ends and oppose him running for president, again unpardoning himself. And the greatest concerns following the storming of the Capitol revolve around potential for more violence. So that pretty much summarizes everything. And 2 descriptors of storming the Capitol: Trump, terrorist, criminals, and dangerous. Top descriptors, not 2 descriptors. Top, it's one of those word clouds. And what words or phrases would you use to describe the actions of those who stormed the Capitol building? The top word is Trump. The second word is terrorist.
That's a good word.
Then after that, criminal, followed by dangerous. Domestic, disgusting, treasonous, wrong, violent, stupid, despicable, horrible, unbelievable. And then in little tiny letters, American.
America.
Right? So, most, 99 out of 100 terms here are not good.
Yeah.
Thugs,
America's
coup, illegal, embarrassing, bad. It didn't play well. And so people like Hawley, who were hoping it would, who got his picture taken with his fist up in the air, find themselves completely isolated by reality.
Yeah.
And, it's even his fellow Republicans are turning on him. And Cruz was never popular, as we know. We've discussed on the show many, many times. So that leads to a situation where things are just changing rapidly. It isn't a question of savvy people, as John Heilman was putting it this morning. It's not that your sources are better than my sources, or well-sourced people can make a prediction about what's going on. Nobody knows what's going on. It's just moving too fast. I count 4. I didn't know there were 5 Republicans who said today that they would vote to impeach. I got John Kotka, who was the first, who's from the Syracuse area of New York, and then Liz Cheney, Adam Kissinger, and then Fred Upton in that order in terms of declaring. I didn't know there was a 5th. But
there is.
I would predict there's going to be 20 by the time this is done. There's
a
lot of people who are going to do this, and they're just quiet about it.
Pocket is not going to help. It's just a jammed mess. And somewhere between Pocket and my Twitter feed, we'll find the 5th.
Yeah, so that must have happened this morning because,
I think
late last night when I went to bed.
Of course, I could have dreamed it.
Fred Upton was I think that's Fred, but he hasn't confirmed it yet. So he would be the 4th. So, okay, there's a 5th. There's going to be a 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. The other big story is out of Axios because they're the ones that actually reported that Mitch McConnell is leaning toward conviction. If that were true, and that's an enormous if.
They're reporting a thing that leads us to believe that, yes. Right.
Right.
Okay.
But, the point is Mitch McConnell generally doesn't leak. And when he goes to friendly outlets and says stuff like this, there's reason to think there's fire behind the smoke. If that, in fact, occurred, he would bring 20 Republicans with him, and Trump would be out. So, that's why that's such a significant leak, even if it's an unconfirmed leak. So, the idea that, this will never happen, I just think that's like yesterday's news. I think you just have to, pay attention to what's going on here, because a lot of this is happening. You and I have participated months before, weeks before, days before, and then just hours before about this argument about whether Trump, in fact, can be impeached and sanctioned even after he's out of office. The answer is clearly yes if the Senate decides that that's what they want to do.
Yeah,
because they're the ones who decide, not us, not Twitter, not people who say, no, it can't happen because I read this article that says it can't. Well, it can. And, it will if that's what they want. So, we'll have to wait and see. We don't know what they want. But given the polling that I just cited, that may well be what they want, because the smart play is to get rid of this stuff. And in that regard is a really interesting other article in Axios today, Scoop, House Freshman at War After Capitol Siege. And I just have to read a couple of tweets that went by. One of these is from Congresswoman Debbie Lesko from Arizona.
Yes, right.
Remember, the Arizona Republican Party is nuts.
Very.
They've sanctioned Cindy McCain and their own Republican governor.
Right.
They're basically now like the Texas Republican Party and Republican parties in many states where the Trumpers have taken over. It's basically QAnon stuff.
Yeah.
So Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, who's from that state, says, for members of Congress to enter the floor of the U.S. House, we now have to go through intense security measures on top of the security we already go through. These new provisions include searches and being wanded like criminals. We now live in Pelosi's communist America. And Kevin Cruz, the historian, responded, I'm sorry you have to do what us commoners have to do, Your Highness. My response is your name Karen?
Poor Karens of the world.
Poor Karens, of the world. But the fact of the matter is there are credible threats to their colleagues. Yeah. And, what I just cited at the very beginning of worrying about whether or not it was an inside job is real. Of course, we have Marjorie Taylor Greene, and we have Representative Boebert, the new people on the block who, Boebert in particular, insists on packing at all times.
Oh, yeah. We have trouble
the new members of Congress do not trust each other, hence this story, House Freshmen at War After Capitol Siege. When you read the story, it's not House Freshmen, it's Republican House Freshmen. Mm-hmm. The freshman class of House Republicans has been fighting since last Wednesday, and let me cite you the good guys, specifically Nancy Mace and Peter Major. On Tuesday, Representatives Nancy Mace and Marjorie Taylor Greene got in a tart back and forth on a text chain with all freshman GOP members, according to sources. Yeah. The conversation started when Greene, a fierce defender of President Trump and former QAnon backer, she's in Georgia, sent a National Pulse article to the chain claiming the president's approval numbers had increased in December. Mace, who came out early against Republicans, Mace is from South Carolina, planned to reject the election results, fired back. I'm disgusted by what you and other Q conspiracy theorists did last week in the chamber after all of the violence. Greene said she condemned it and told Mace, I don't believe the fake news. She also brought up how some Black Lives Matter protests turned violent. Sure. That's the go-to now. Oh, well, you didn't like what happened in the Capitol? What about all the violence for, as soon as you start getting into the what about stuff. Yeah, what about the fact that Democrats never accepted Trump for 4 years? What about this? What about that? This is treason and sedition.
Yeah, that's
and they try to string people up and shut up about this whataboutism stuff. Greene said she condemned it and told Mace, don't believe the fake news. She also brought up how some Black Lives Matter protests turned violent. Mace answered, literal QAnon lady trying to deny she's a QAnon lady.
That was me? Oh, I didn't realize who tweeted
that. Was Nancy
I thought that
Mace's
was just a random friend in the Twitter feed today. Oh, yeah, that's true. Haha. Okay. That's funny.
So according to the sources who've read the messages, Burgess Owens chimed in thanking Greene for the support of the president. Peter Major pinged his support of Mace, why it matters. The divisions we're seeing in the Republican Party as a whole are rippling through every layer of Congress and making enemies within the new freshman class. Yeah. There's normally a sense of camaraderie among new members when they take office. You can speak to this. You were there. As they lean on each other while learning to navigate Congress. And because they need to learn to navigate Congress and the halls of Congress, I don't think the new people were the ones who supplied information about how to get to offices. That's why Biggs and Mo Brooks and Paul Gosar are the suspects.
Yeah.
Who were named by one of the people who were storming the Capitol, which is why their names come up. The usual grace period is evaporated as they're pressured to take a stance on Trump during the impeachment vote Wednesday, which is today. And what they're saying, who is the freshman representative that's betraying everybody's trust and leaking our group chat to the press, Green said to Axios. A spokesperson for Mace didn't respond to her request for comment. Well, we're not saying she did it. I'm just saying. Right?
Yeah,
so
well,
that's how it's going there. So, there are big issues here. And in terms of the Republican Party splitting, that split is real. And there may be two parties by the end of all of this.
All right. That's.
I mean, if Donald Trump only has 34% approval, the lowest in 4 years, as Politico Morning Consult says, then the impetus for McConnell, who was just reelected, to go along with what everything Trump does after Trump just tried to kill him, isn't necessarily there. And perhaps more importantly to McConnell, the money's drying up because the Chamber of Commerce, who I've worked with, I worked with 10, 15 years ago in Washington trying to, not worked for, but worked with, trying to convince corporate America that pandemics were real and you really had to prepare. And they actually got on board and did quite a bit in terms of doing that. But the folks I work with at the Chamber of Congress were their security threat people, you can imagine, they look like they wear dark suits and glasses and have an earpiece and, close cropped hair, those types. If they are turning on Trump, that's like a big deal. And if the money is drying up, that's a big deal for Congress. And so I think that's what got Kevin McCarthy's attention, and that's what got Mitch McConnell's attention, and that's why the potential for Republicans to actually vote for impeachment is quite real. I mean, sure, stuff happened. Sure, they tried to kill you, but we're talking about money here.
Yeah, that's the big motivator, and I'm happy to see them reacting to that. And I've really enjoyed the creative ways that people have found to push back in ways that matter to Republicans, i.e., money. But that once you involve the money, there are a lot more players in this game than you might initially realize. So it's been really fantastic watching the creative ways that people have come up with to ding them. Not only money, but also various honors as people are losing their fellowships, etc., and associations with otherwise prestigious organizations. Plus, of course, New York as a city, getting ready to sever as many contracts as it reasonably can with the Trump organization as well. So
which is a funny story this morning. De Blasio went on TV today and said they were doing that. But there's at least 2 skating rinks. Yeah. There's one golf course.
2 skating rinks? Okay. Sure, why not?
There's Woolman, and there's another one that Trump had his name on it. They were so-called managing.
Surely could be.
There's a golf course in the Bronx, and there's the Carousel in Central Park.
Right.
One of the other skating rinks is in Central Park as well. So, the reason that New York City can do that is apparently there was a clause in the contract because everybody in New York City knows Trump that said that this contract is null and void if criminal activity is involved.
Probably pretty standard in contracts, all over New York City, certainly. But, yeah, good inclusion for Trump.
Yeah, but I think in the Trump contract, it was like the first line.
Yeah, they may have said that might have been the first thing you sit down and say, there's like a morals clause or a criminal
something
activity
along those lines. I don't know if it's standard or not. It's just so funny that it applies here because, Yep,
pretty good. I'm glad they did that. By the way, number 5 among the Republicans, I think also a new member, because I don't know how she pronounces her name exactly, Jamie Herrera Beutler.
Okay, good.
3rd District of Washington.
And I for example, I expect Nancy Mason Peter Major to actually go ahead and do that.
I guess so, yeah.
There's a number of votes that they're going to get, and I think that's great. So go on the record. If you don't want to go on the record until this afternoon, that's fine. The discussion is starting now, and given how long-winded congressmen are, the projected vote was this afternoon, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was like dinner. by the time they got it done.
Could be.
But it depends.
They're pretty good at the
depends how long
scheduling in the House because they don't have as much flexibility. But yeah, final vote was projected for 3 p.m. They first need to debate the rule. They'll debate that
at the
for an
earliest.
hour.
And the rule, I was reading about the rule. They got together and they decided what rule is going to run these things. And I looked at that and said, my goodness, I know what they're talking about. Thanks to David Waltman.
Hey, all right. Yeah, there are some interesting aspects of the rules as well. And I have to check both the rule for last night's resolution and one for today. I think there was some extra inclusions that they snuck into the rule that... Well, actually, yeah, that brings us back around to the other story that you mentioned. Part of the rules, they just snuck a House rules change into the rule for either the impeachment or the resolution on the 25th Amendment last night, which was responsible, I think, for, one, a mask mandate on the House floor that includes fines for members that increase as you go along if you don't wear your mask while on the floor. And then
up to $2,500, which means it gets to fund the $2,000 checks.
Yeah, so it can happen over and over again. Every instance carries its own fine. And also the installation of metal detectors at the doors to the entrance of the House chamber, which caused a real ruckus last night.
Which was that Debbie Lesko quote that I read. Mm-hmm. Here's one from Peter Major on his colleagues making a stink about the new magnetometers per Punchbowl News. I am sorry some of my colleagues are being assholes.
Well,
I think he's a yes on impeachment.
Yeah, I guess so. There was some real fight over all those things. We can go over the various angles of the fight, but generally speaking, I will say this: it looked terrible on top of terrible for them to be complaining about it when all the rest of the world, regular people, go through magnetometers all the time, and well, they may complain about it, but it's like, yeah, welcome to the world. A pretty elitist complaint to be saying, I have the right to go around these things because I'm a VIP. We'll be right back.
Yes, Your Majesty.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We left off by noting that last night there was the very quick and sudden installation of magnetometers, known to the rest of us as metal detectors, but that's a broad category. But the things you would walk through at an airport or anywhere else in America, if you are a regular American, on your way into school in some cases, certainly on your way onto an airplane, in a federal courthouse, or if you were visiting the very same building, the Capitol, and weren't a member of Congress, or being escorted around those metal detectors by a member of Congress. Also a common practice that may be just about ready to come to an end formally, which is good idea. And, well, I would say not a moment too soon, but it really is kind of late in all this. Just to tie this, by the way, to the opening of the show, how long, I looked it up, how long have I been saying that Marjorie Taylor Greene and then later Lauren Boebert were, seating them was to set in motion a slow motion assassination attempt against maybe everybody else in Congress, and who knows who else, now that they, of course, have combined their QAnon belief with their gun activism. And sure enough, in addition to both of them being caught all over the place refusing to wear masks because they're lunatics, they likewise immediately fought against the new rule about the magnetometers and the admission of guns onto the Capitol floor. It's never been permissible to carry guns on the floor, though people have done it. And Boebert promised that she would. They put up the magnetometers, and she was among the first to refuse to go through them on the way to the floor. And she had a confrontation, and I guess they eventually let her through. Louis Gohmert just simply went around somehow. They need to install those things right up against the doors so there's no going around. A few other members likewise made protests and, in fact, were admitted to the floor as frontline Capitol Police officers are going to have a conference with people up and down the chain of command before they get comfortable deciding what to do about members of Congress flouting this new rule. Lots of argument yesterday by chowder-headed Republicans who I think heard snippets of what was going on in clearer-headed members' minds and simply bellowed to the cops that metal detectors are unconstitutional, which
so
they
I
are not.
saw that, and I had questions about it.
Yeah.
And I asked my Twitter friend, an erstwhile political foe, Brian W. Schoeneman. You may remember Brian because he is a Virginia ex-GOP. He's still GOP, but he was an ex-elections official, and he helped to run a recount years ago and did it very transparently as the recount was going, and it was really refreshing. It was in the pre-Trump era. And Brian tweeted, "Does anybody actually think a fine is going to get congressmen and women who don't want to wear a mask to wear one? Median net worth of members of Congress is over $1 million." And I said, well, it'll keep them off the floor. And he said, no, you can't really do that. And I said, why not? Because I'm not a lawyer. I get to ask these questions, assume anything. And he said, Article 1, Section 6, Clause 1, you can't be arrested during their attendance from session or going to or from. And I said, well, is stopping somebody until they put a mask on arresting them?
Right,
and he said, well, I would argue it is. You're infringing on their freedom of movement. One of the primary reasons behind the arrest clause was to stop people under color of law from barring legislators from voting. This would do exactly that. And I said, well, you have proxy voting now. You can make your, vote. You don't have to be on the floor to do it. So this doesn't stop them from voting. And he said, well, they still can't be barred. They may choose to not go, but they can't be prohibited. Constitutional prerogatives, fines are probably there because they can't bar them from the floor. And I said, oh, yeah? Well, we might find out. You might be wrong.
Yeah.
So that's where I left it.
Yes.
But I am not a lawyer.
Let's pick it up. I am, though I'm not a practicing attorney, but let's practice right now. But not in the formal sense, so don't call me State Bar Association. I'm not advising anybody on their legal rights at this point. However, he's right. It does say that. And there is a germ of truth, as is often the case to the Republican arguments. I think just what happened is somebody who might have known what they were talking about may have said, no, it's unconstitutional. The situation in totality, they feel may be unconstitutional. And, the rest of the group, having heard that germ of truth, the salad that gets tossed about in their head and then spewed out as words later is, metal detectors are unconstitutional, so you can't stop me. But the germ of truth is just as your friend has said. There is, of course, the wording of Article 1, Section 6 that provides, as they say, privilege from arrest for members of Congress. As the section actually reads, members should be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses and in going to and returning from the same. And the explanation of it was quite correct. It's to prevent people from under color of law from preventing members from exercising their rights to represent their constituents, etc. You are correct in pointing out that that may or may not constitute an arrest. And also correct in pointing out that members can vote from elsewhere, especially now, these days, under the COVID protocols, having brought back proxy voting, having brought back remote voting. It occurs to me, though, that we don't even really need to get all the way to there, because there are official, regular, normal use voting machines that the members of Congress, of the House anyway, use to vote on the floor. There are identical voting machines in the cloakrooms the antechambers, if you will, from which members can vote without entering the floor, and there always have been, so long as we've had the voting machines. And they probably forgot that, and I don't know whether they would enter that into their legal argument. But better argument than all of that, still available, of course. But I will point out, what they really mean is that if you insisted on going around the metal detectors and barging onto the floor, the question becomes, if members are privileged from arrest, what leverage do you have over them to force them through the magnetometers if they know you can't arrest them and can challenge any arrests in court? So essentially, I think what they were saying was, if the arrest would be unconstitutional, and there's an argument that it isn't, but if the arrest would be found unconstitutional, then basically there's nothing, you can't make me go through that, and so therefore I'll go around it. And at least for one day they have. Now, there are other penalties that can be levied on them besides arrest.
To bring this discussion from the theoretical to the practical, during the discussion right now that's happening about impeachment, where the Republicans are saying you should delay this because it's good to delay, and the Democrats are saying there's a lot of stuff going on and we need to get this done now. Madison Cawthorn says he was armed with a loaded gun during the riot on Capitol Hill. This is the report. This could have turned much uglier. Bill Scher quotes him and says, "Fortunately, I was armed, so we would have been able to protect ourselves." So the idea that they're not bringing guns, well, no, they are. And so that's why this is a discussion.
Yes. Then, of course, I guess my next question is, why didn't you do something, you hero? But whatever. Maybe he felt he was outnumbered or was on the other side. So actually, for Madison Cawthorn to say he was armed during the insurrection is, to me, to say he was ready to join the insurrection.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the worry, and that's why those magnetometers are there now.
Right.
I mean, it's as I saw on Twitter, I didn't do this one, but, it's apt. The whole sentiment on the Republican side is the only way to stop a bad guy with a zip tie is a good guy with a zip tie.
I guess. Yeah, they didn't jump out and do anything. They stayed in the safe rooms and gave everybody COVID for another thing. But of course, there was the report that, and it's true, that Lauren Boebert was super situationally aware and tweeting out the locations of various VIPs, including the Speaker of the House, in live and in real time, so that insurrectionist invaders could find out whether it was, if their mission was to seize Pelosi bodily, bother breaking into the House floor or not, or they could direct their attentions elsewhere. Again, as I've said, I've been explicit in saying that I actually fully believe it's not just rhetorical tools here, that Boebert and Green are to be regarded as insider assassin plants inside the House, and they really should never have been seated, and I began saying so in September, and pretty much every day ever since. Anyway, there's another piece of the puzzle, though. In addition to their having sort of flubbed the explanation as to what they really thought was unconstitutional, I don't know, maybe this would jog your memory, and if it does, then fine, but if not, then you have something to discuss with your friend with regard to his balance of approach. I'm going to read you the rest of Section 6, and in fact, the preceding clause of Chapter 6. But here's the whole beginning of Clause 1 of Section 6. The senators and representatives shall, this is the boring part, receive a compensation for their services to be ascertained by law and pay.
We have, on top of everything else, we have to pay them?
Yes. And this is what gets in the way of doing things like saying, well, we'll withhold their pay whenever the federal government has to shut down because they won't pass a budget. You got a constitutional problem. They're supposed to receive that pay. Anyway, so yeah, it's to be ascertained by law. That means they get to set their own salary. That's another issue. And paid out of the Treasury of the United States. Now the exciting part, where they find their privilege from arrest. The part that, is it Brian? Is that the name of your? That I guess Brian he didn't read to you, unless this now jogs your memory. It's actually the beginning of the sentence that he read you. He read you the end. They shall in all cases except. Wow, that's a word you'll want to install into the discussion, right? And when you're talking about their privilege from this, they shall in all cases except treason. It's pretty specific. We know about the elements of treason. Don't know if you can prove it based on what happened last night. Except treason, felony, possible with guns in D.C., but maybe not. It's the federal enclave. I don't know. all cases except treason, felony, and here's an easy one, breach of the peace. They shall, in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses and in going to and returning from the same. Well, go through the magnetometer. No, you can't make me. You're going to have to, and you can't arrest me, so how are you going to stop me? I run onto the floor, and at some point they're forced then to tackle members and drag them off the floor, or just simply resisting or refusing a lawful order of a police officer. Is it breach of the peace? Well, tell it to the judge. We'll find out. There may be judges who believe it's not. But honestly, that's a pretty gigantic exception not to include in your discussion of why you believe the whole situation is unconstitutional. Not to mention, of course, that you can get around to just simply saying, well, how about this? Every time you enter the floor without going through the magnetometers or without a mask, you are subject to censure. And how about a rules change that says any day you're subject to censure for those infractions, you are also barred from speaking on the floor for the day, like what happens when they take your words down. Let's throw that in.
The analogy that pops into my mind, which leads me to a different story, but the analogy that pops into mind is the Lord of the Rings, of course.
Mm-hmm, sure.
When Gandalf was protesting, trying to disarm him by taking his staff, and he looked at them and said, what, you're taking the walking stick of an old man? What's wrong with you? And they looked at him and said, it's your staff and you're a wizard.
Yes.
Come on.
Right. Or you're a senator from antebellum South Carolina, or a House member, and you've come to visit Charles Sumner.
It's just a cane.
Right.
What possible harm can you do with a cane?
By the way, Sumner, well, of course, or rather, Brooks, the perpetrator of the attack, it's rarely mentioned for whatever reason, but last time I mentioned it, or this story, someone reminded me, Brooks wasn't alone. He came with a friend who carried a gun and threatened to shoot anybody who stopped the caning. We don't talk about that very much.
Yeah, so, there's reasons for this. And so, that's what's going on while they discuss why Trump should leave office. The other
Brooks
story
may
it
not
led
be
me
related to
was
Preston.
just a sidelight here. Trump has been kicked off of Twitter, and so now he's not able to respond to a lot of this stuff. And Twitter's been really quiet the last couple of days, and it's really been pleasant to be on it. So, in its absence, it's great. But I was talking with a journalism professor about, what it really meant to be off of Twitter. Because, of course, as everybody knows, it's a private company, so it's got nothing to do with First Amendment stuff. But he was trying to explain it's not the content of what Trump says, it's the distribution. The fact that if you blast it out on Twitter, everybody sees it, that's what he's being cut off from, and that's why it bothers him so much. Yeah. And then went into this long discussion, appropriate and very erudite and detailed and footnoted discussion about how distribution of information is at least important as, the content. And I said, I get that. I saw Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Yeah. And he said, what? I said, don't you remember the part where the little kids were trying to get their newsletter out and then they got beat up by the thugs who just didn't let them publish? That's your distribution.
I think they don't. I don't.
You could write your message, but if you can't get it to the people of Mr. Smith's home state and they don't see it, what good is it?
Yes.
So that's why Trump was protesting. That's the Republican argument is. You're beating up the little kids.
Right. All the little kids who deliver all those parlor
actually,
messages.
That's a very good reference. I get that, You could see it in pictures, but even lay people can understand.
Yeah. All right. Well, an argument well presented, but I'm going to beat up whoever presented it. So that's the end of that.
But that's Trump's frustration now, and in fact, it goes along with the fact that he's really not putting up much of a defense against impeachment. I mean, even now, as the Republicans in Congress are trying to make the claim that nothing's going on here, who are they citing? Alan Dershowitz.
Who? I heard they hate that guy in the shoreline of Massachusetts or something.
Yeah.
Right. He very badly wants to represent Trump in the impeachment trial, which who knows whether
Trump isn't making any efforts to defend himself. That's the weird thing. There's no lineup of stars. There's no, invade television with 97 different surrogates who are going to speak up on his behalf. There's nothing. He's basically lost it, and he's not. The White House is so incompetent now with everybody leaving or refusing to follow his orders.
Yeah.
That he really can't do anything. Did you know he went to Alamo, Texas yesterday? Hardly anybody knows. Fox didn't cover it.
We didn't talk about it at all. I think we mentioned that he was on a trip when I talked with
He went
Joan.
and saw the wall. He went to the Mexican side of the wall. He signed something.
Yes.
And then he came
signed
back.
the wall.
And, who cares? Nobody followed him.
Yeah. There was very little
it.
coverage.
Nobody
That was great.
The only outlet that covered it was Newsmax.
It was kind of funny. He made some comments to the press, I guess, on his way out the door, and I don't know. So, but yeah, about the lowest intensity of coverage of anything he's ever done, certainly as president, maybe forever. So that was of some interest. Alamo, Texas, by the way, down near the border wall. That was the point of the trip. I suspect, as other people joked, that maybe he thought that the Alamo was also there, which actually probably would have been a really bad optical, event to have following the siege of the Capitol. But anyway, and then others, of course, just marveling at the fact that he didn't end up at an Alamo car rental somewhere, thanks to Rudy Giuliani. But
right.
Now, total
again, some
black
other
hole
things that are
on
sort
him.
of breaking and under discussion. Mikey Sherrill last night, I don't know if you saw this, actually specifically accused colleagues of conducting surveillance for Capitol rioters.
Yes, that's what you were mentioning.
She said, but she's the person who actually put it out there. So Jonathan Turley, of course, is on it and saying that's an extraordinary allegation.
It is,
but
Jonathan
Turley.
Is.
Extraordinary things happen.
You're right.
And so,
Your name
that's
is
part
extraordinarily
of all of
like Turd Lee. But
meanwhile, Jim Sciutto is estimating, if informal whips are correct, about 1/10 of the people who voted to overturn the election will vote for impeachment. He put it as only 1/10.
I believe
that. And I'm
that.
thinking that any of them are voting for impeachment is astounding.
It is. That brings us back to a mention of a story yesterday that I also have. I've seen some other elements circulating that might be part of the story. One member of Congress at least told some journalist somewhere, and I will note to self to dig this up, but said that he heard from other members. I guess he wasn't willing to say this was what he was doing, but he heard from other members, allegedly, that they personally did not believe that the challenge to the electoral vote was warranted, but they were going along with it because, of course, the president demanded it. But more to the point, they were going along with it because they feared for their family's safety at home if they were among the members opposing the president, that the mob that they all, I guess, all knew would likely attack the Capitol would also attack their homes. And they're right. They would. It's happened already. And that they felt so threatened that they felt, it's funny because they probably sort of regarded it in their minds as, just it's better, why make waves? But I think it's being regarded as much more serious as it ought to be. I saw mention yesterday, I guess people repeating what they had heard on the Rachel Maddow program, and I should go dig it up and watch it and see if this is what they were talking about. But she was marveling for one reason or another, and I don't know what the connection was because I missed the show, about the involvement of public corruption investigators, by which I think she means the public integrity section of the DOJ, involved in the investigation of Wednesday's insurrection and terrorist attack. And she thought, I think she probably was thinking maybe that means that they're, taking a good hard look at Trump and White House and members of Congress who might have been directly involved in the planning. But I also wonder whether they might not be tasked with the mission. If there are physical threats being made or implied against members of Congress and their families, and that is changing the way they cast their votes in Congress, that is squarely within the wheelhouse of the public integrity section, whether it's because you're being paid or threatened. We usually hear about bribes or allegations of bribes. We very rarely hear of direct threats to the families and personal safety of members of Congress in order to influence their votes. But that would be instance number one, on their list of things to investigate. And it'll be really interesting to see whether the FBI starts rounding up people who never came to Washington and never expressed any interest in coming to Washington in connection with the same insurrection, even though they never left home because they were threatening people locally. That I'm waiting to see. There are a lot of stories that we haven't gotten to yet about the events of last Wednesday, from comments at the DOJ yesterday, basically saying this is the biggest criminal enterprise we may ever have investigated. This is the
pretty
most
amazing.
wide-ranging.
So before I leave, let me just give you the latest update from Jake Sherman about timing. Impeachment
Please.
update. We anticipate procedural votes between 10:30 and 12:30, and final passage of impeachment around 3:45. So it's already 45 minutes later than originally anticipated. Mm-hmm. And that may change, but that's where it's at the moment.
Okay.
It's hard to keep up with all of this. But here we are. So we're talking as a deliberative body about a second impeachment. Mm-hmm. Why is there second impeachment? Why was Trump impeached twice? Because the Republicans didn't do their job the first time and convict him. Uh-huh. So now they have a chance to go back and do it again. They get a mulligan. And Christian Schneider writes in USA Today, Nancy Pelosi offers Republicans an impeachment gift again. Will they take it this time? Trump's a tumor that needs to be cut without delay. Pelosi's mercifully handing Republicans a scalpel. Hopefully they do. And that's where things stand. I'll leave that there.
Okay.
And let you do the rest of your show. But we'll be back tomorrow, and we'll talk about what happened during this impeachment discussion.
All right.
I'll listen to some of it even.
Sure. Why not do that? It sounds like it might be fun. One last note, just because we already discussed it, and I can do it quick. City of Alamo says it received no contact from the White House ahead of Trump's Texas visit. So that's interesting. So that's good. At least they're not on the hook for security costs, or maybe they're minimal this time because they're never going to get paid for that. But, as you mentioned, lack of organization and professionalism in the White House. And I guess you say it cost him in terms of coverage, but I guess he didn't tell, for whatever reason, either purposefully or not, the people you would need to tell in order to make a big to-do when he made his visit. And, whatever. So, I don't know. Just one more element.
Well, it's to the point where I want to do this. Okay, fine.
Right.
Just go do this. Go.
And he can order his way onto a helicopter. For a few more days, they should, by the way, not by any means offer him the courtesy ride home on the 20th. Let him take an Uber.
I think on the 20th, when that happens, they should offer him the courtesy ride. Just, have a ramp instead of stairs.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. That's true. Or,
we did everything right. It's not my
fault
the helicopter. Get on the plane.
Yeah. Have the helicopter take off and hover and drop one of those rope ladders.
Yeah, let him get up that way. Do you think he's a flight risk? That's the other thing we were talking about.
I think it's a risk to let him on a flight. That's for sure. Yeah, I do. I mean, why not? He was already rumored to be heading off to Scotland. The Scottish, I think, have done their best to put the kibosh on that.
But what if he wants to visit Moscow?
Right. He can't visit Luxembourg. I know that. Pompeo was turned away. Yeah.
Of course we can. Yeah, but you can't convict me. Well, that's a different discussion. We already had that discussion elsewhere.
Right. He may, And if he doesn't pardon Snowden before he leaves office and ends up in Moscow, Snowden might kick his ass.
The other thing I saw that was actually kind of funny is that, you're telling me I can't pardon myself? Well, then I'm not pardoning anybody else.
Yeah. Oh, right. Oh, yeah. That's definitely in pocket somewhere. That was fantastic. Amazing story, amazing insight into the way his brain works. And by the way, I accept that communication as official and as the rescission of all prior pardons. So I guess Roger Stone and the rest should be reporting to prison sometime soon. It doesn't
I guess
work
so.
that way.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
And I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Very good. Thanks, Greg. So far, so good. We've survived as a nation, and I suppose we will until tomorrow as well for the exciting conclusion of the impeachment work. All right. About pardons also, I guess just before we head out the door here and I start digging around. One, you mentioned the second impeachment and I made the joke and then I remembered, that joke's already been made. Somewhere on the internet is floating around a picture that I retweeted that I thought was very clever, but because I just retweeted it, I have no record of it. If someone took the screenshot from, again, Lord of the Rings, but the movies, of the hobbits asking, the line, but this time asking, what about second impeachment? And it was a big joke when that was in circulation, and then it happened. And that was even before the insurrection, by the way. So the sentiment was already there. I think it was from before the insurrection. I don't know. Anyway, almost time to head out for our top of the hour break. What was the other thing I was going to say about? It was definitely with regard to the impeachment, and I've already lost my way in my train of thought here. But okay, well, what can you do? We'll be back on the impeachment. Oh, yes, right, the pardons. I was saying last night when it became clear, when Cheney made her announcement and when word came out that McConnell might be favorably inclined to this, it's still a huge question mark on McConnell. A lot of things that could go wrong with that, but not that bad the more I think about it. But anyway, he's still a big question mark nonetheless. And I was wondering about the pardons. I thought that once that announcement came out, McConnell and Cheney, I thought, would do well to contact the White House and the Department of Justice and maybe a few other offices scattered around town and say, listen, this is happening and you should, from a professional viewpoint, freeze all pardon activity at this point. I know you're going to disregard that and try to rush some through, and you would, I guess, no one can stop you physically from doing it at this point. But be aware that all of those pardons will be challenged, particularly any pardons that have anything whatsoever to do in any way, shape, or form with the insurrection. There's a relatively solid legal argument that they might be subject to some contention and perhaps invalidation in court. But, we'll have to, that'll be an uphill fight for our side on that one. And of course the self-pardon, that too comes into it. Can't force him to freeze, but might as well tell him that he should regard it as freezing. And I also thought they should issue a warning to the staff that, wrong music there. I hope it's not the end of the show. Issue the same warning to the staff and basically say, I know we can't stop you physically right now, but we're going to do our best to give you reason to stop by issuing this warning. Not only should you be freezing all activity on pardons, because we tend to impeach the president and reverse these pardons if they're connected to the subject matter of this impeachment, but you, as a federal official, will be subject to impeachment yourself if you facilitate these illegal pardons on your way out the door. They should say so. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're in our second hour. Who knows what may happen in terms of call-ins in the second hour. But if nothing happens, I will plow through the raft of stories I have. I found what I think is a fairly poor substitute for the one I saw. I liked just the one-shot hit of the one screen that just said, what about second impeachment? And I do think it circulated prior to the attack on the Capitol. But now there is a new 4-frame one that includes, what about impeachment? And then the answer, we already had it, like breakfast. We've had one, yes. What about second impeachment? So a 4-frame version of it, which might as well circulate for you all to see just for fun. And I'll put the KITM hashtag on it. But boy, I wish I could find the original. And that's one of the troubles of retweeting those visual memes without parking them in Pocket. I know right after I did it, it's not a big enough, it's not a story. I have so many stories I need to read. I'm not going to have time for this thing. But if I ever mention it, I don't know. But do I need to prove to you that that's circulated really in order to retain your trust? I work hard at retaining your trust all the time. And I continue to work on it, and even in the middle of all of this. All right, I don't know what to do. We'll get to some stories. Privileges of the floor granted this morning, both for Armando, if necessary, and Joan, who warned that it might be possible. Although, honestly, I imagine she's glued to the TV right now, not physically, but metaphorically. If it happens to be true that it's physical, give us a call. We'll do what we can. Anyway, let me read some stories and tidbits, and I don't know if there's anything I have time to read all the way through, but you should be doing that. I should be doing that. I guess it's really going to be amazing how we could do wrap-up shows on this last week for a year and not get to everything. So much detail is emerging about what happened on Wednesday, and huge amounts of it. I will never get to it all. And everybody's write-ups about them are fantastic and chock full of new information, and you're not up to date if you haven't read them all. but we'll do our best and see if we can use our time wisely here. But I really doubt it. It's going to be another mishmash. So here I go. Maybe I'll just rip through headlines here and the Twitter feed and see what I can get to you. First of all, I'm going to actually peel away from the Capitol, but it's a related issue in terms of Republican totalitarianism, essentially. And it is this, you remember the Pennsylvania story. New developments in the Pennsylvania story. The federal court has ruled that the count in the election of state senator, I can't remember. So let me open up the Inquirer here and the latest story about that one and give you the tidbits from elsewhere out of memory. Andrew Seidman and Jonathan Tamari in the Philadelphia Inquirer telling the story of the winding saga. Oh, they're going to give me the paywall. Well, they're entitled over there. I'm not a Philadelphia Inquirer subscriber, but I'm about to cheat. Where are we? Dang. Scooting down. Where's the... This is starts off with a different narrative than I thought. I wanted to get to... So maybe it's a different story entirely. Let me look at that headline again. Yeah, it's actually a different story. But in pocket elsewhere, dang it, is the continuing saga of that one state senator who also may share the first name of Brian, and now I can't remember all the things. And where can I make a quick search or something and maybe bring this up? Pennsylvania in pocket search, it's not that robust and it doesn't work all that well. But you remember the story of the Pennsylvania state senator who the Republicans in control of the chamber refused to seat during their swearing in the other day. And they got into a big fight with presiding officer, Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman there about it, who did a fantastic job of yelling and screaming, but it didn't stop it from happening. But they wouldn't administer the oath to this one Pennsylvania state senator, Brian something or other. Damn it, I'm going to have to look. Pennsylvania state senator. There we are. Oh, maybe it's Jim Brewster. It's not Brian at all. And the controversy, as they saw it, as Republicans saw it, surrounding his election was that two counties that were at least in part included in his Senate district had different rules for how to decide on the admissibility, the eligibility of ballots suffering from one particular sort of deficiency. And I think this was a date being written on the ballot, which really honestly is pretty useless in terms of preventing any fraud. Anyway, you could always just write the old date on there somehow, but it's really about whether or not the ballot arrives in time. Anyway, the Republican opponent had refused to concede. It was a very close race. I think under 100. It was in the neighborhood of 60-something, I think, votes separating the two of them. And one county did not allow anybody to cure this disability by adding a date, or actually, I think, decided not to count votes that had either were missing the dates or were in the wrong place, whereas the next county over did decide. Now, according to Pennsylvania election law, it is up to the counties to do that. The Republican opponent was making a equal protection argument leaning on Bush v. Gore, which you're not supposed to be able to do, and saying that if both counties had adopted the rule of not counting them, then she would win. But if both counties had adopted the same rule of counting them, she would lose. And if they didn't adopt the same rule and kept the rules that they did adopt, she also would have lost. And she lost all the way up in the Pennsylvania courts, up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Still wouldn't concede. Then the Republicans in control of the chamber, because they had the gavel, wouldn't swear him in. And there was a big to-do. Anyway, they still, I think... well, maybe they have finally done it here, but up until like yesterday, they were still fighting over whether or not to seat the guy. Here's news from the Penn Live site. Pennsylvania Senate to swear in Jim Brewster to fill Western Pennsylvania seat, dated yesterday. So I guess they made their decision I think in the wake of the attack on the Capitol, they kind of scrambled to undo this decision. This leads me to, why did I have this wrong article up from the Philadelphia Inquirer before? Similar vein. But what's going on among the Pennsylvania delegation to Congress about the challenge to their electoral votes is also very interesting. Tidbit of news that I found elsewhere, and we'll have to remember to dig up for you. Members of the Pennsylvania delegation, at least among the Democrats anyway, maybe some Republicans too if they opposed it, or that I'm not sure. But they apparently announced to someone, I don't know who you have to announce this sort of thing to, but like I was saying about creative ways to strike back against the various insurrectionists in the various forms that they took the other day, they have announced their intention not to work on legislation, not to agree to cooperate on legislation with any member of Congress who voted to invalidate Pennsylvania's electoral votes in the count on January 6th, which is a very justifiable position. This was an attack, even before, well, in this case, after the attack on the Capitol itself, but that one that was planned and started before, but in conjunction with and hand in glove with the attack on the Capitol. That was the whole point of the attack on the Capitol. But if you threatened and took action to invalidate the electoral votes and therefore the voting voice of Pennsylvanians all over the state, they were going to defend Pennsylvania's honor in this and would refuse to work with you on legislation. I don't know whether they'll always oppose your legislation necessarily. They might be over a barrel on some of those things, but no co-sponsorships, no cooperation, and who knows what else. Another of the more creative ways that people have come up with to fight back against this. That brings me to this other Philadelphia Inquirer headline. First it was fraud, then, well, that is to say, quote unquote fraud, and it isn't scare quotes. First it was, quote, fraud, then they just didn't like the rules. How Pennsylvania Republicans justified overturning an election. There were, of course, Pennsylvania Republicans who voted for this and who initiated this resistance. So let me give you a flavor of this, if not the whole article. I don't think we can spend all that much time on it. As Joe Biden took the lead in vote counting and then won Pennsylvania, some of the state's top Republicans, some in Congress, some not, added their voices to President Trump's baseless claims that the election was stolen and rife with fraud. U.S. Representative Scott Perry joined the quote-unquote Stop the Steal rally in Harrisburg and later went on Fox Business Network to blast Pennsylvania's election as a, quote, horrific embarrassment. They say, quote, oh, 100,000 votes just showed up, and oh, by the way, they're all just happen to be for Joe Biden, he said in one interview on November 6th. We had dead people voting. You didn't. We had a lot of people voting 2 or 3 times. You didn't. This from Representative Mike Kelly, who also sued in a case that got shot down pretty quickly in about 15 courts. That, he said during a November 24th interview on Sean Hannity's Fox News radio program. And U.S. Representative Guy Reschenthaler went on the far-right cable channel Newsmax to amplify unproven claims and said, we know there were individuals that were dead that miraculously registered to vote and mailed in a vote. None of it was true. Yeah, none of it was true. I saw Reschenthaler yesterday. I think he's on the Rules Committee now, so I watched him in the hearing briefly yesterday. Yeah, liar. Get the news. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a little ad that they stick in here. I'm reading the pocket version, unformatted version, so I can get around the paywall. Sorry, Philly. I'll send you a nickel one day. The claims were false on their face and quickly debunked, yet the congressman and others from Pennsylvania nevertheless spent months supporting the claims that widespread fraud, procedural decisions, or irregularities undermine the integrity of the election, lending their authority to the argument that the very foundation of American democracy was being corrupted, which led to a deadly attack against the Capitol, as you know. Each claim fell by the wayside. The Trump campaign did not allege even a single instance of voter fraud in numerous Pennsylvania lawsuits. When the lawyers were in court and could get in trouble for lying, they very pointedly would not say there was fraud. And Rudy Giuliani himself kept saying, this isn't a fraud case. He was trying to avoid sanctions because he knew he couldn't prove these things. Anyway, courts repeatedly rejected complaints about procedures, and the vote counting Perry and others cited was the result, widely predicted before Election Day, of mail ballots taking longer to count and being used more heavily by Democrats. That's the so-called vote dumps, right? There's only evidence of one attempt to vote on behalf of a dead person, and of course it was by a Trump supporter in Delaware County, and emerged well after Kelly and Reschenthaler had made their claims. So when 8 Pennsylvania congressmen objected last week to accepting Pennsylvania's votes for president, a move that would have disenfranchised every voter in the state, they narrowed their arguments, instead citing administrative procedures and saying they were only trying to ensure the integrity of Pennsylvania's vote. A week later, even as new videos and evidence emerged capturing the horror of the Capitol assault and the FBI warnings of potential new attacks, none of the lawmakers have broken with Trump or voiced second thoughts about their votes. U.S. Representative Dan Meuser, I don't know, M-E-U-S-E-R, said Tuesday that he knew his objections wouldn't succeed. Oh, I think this is it. This might be the guy I was talking about before. Said that he knew these objections wouldn't succeed in the Democratic-controlled House, but that he had to raise his concerns. It does not change the facts as I understood them, and I think understood them pretty well, that our Secretary of State said, oh, okay, this isn't, I don't know, maybe he later changed his tune. But here he's saying our Secretary of State acted outside of his authority, or her authority, I think maybe, and jurisdiction, and I had to call them out on it, Meuser said in a phone interview. And he's saying them, and I think he also doesn't know the proper gender pronouns for the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania. Neither do I. In a December 6th Facebook post, Meuser had written, the unfortunate legacy of this past election is the unlawful and suppressive actions taken, things we typically read about in corrupt countries, like assaults on the Capitol, too. Anyway, is he, I don't know, is he the guy that said that he was worried about his family? I thought that name rang a bell and that maybe it was him, but I guess not. Anyway, but just to trace the arc on Meuser, he's saying, I can understand how that can fuel people's emotions, but to fuel them to the point to storm the Capitol, I don't think anybody expected that, including the president. So he's changed his tune a little. Asked about his Facebook post, he said he hopes both parties will soften their tones. Yeah. Our Capitol got stormed. What difference Dan Meuser made? What did he make in the end? I'm sure none, but if you don't think I feel a certain level, he paused. That's our United States Capitol. That perhaps I could have done more. Sure I do. All right, whatever that's supposed to mean. On the House floor last week, hours after the insurrection, as debate crawled from Wednesday night into Thursday morning, Meuser's fellow objectors dropped their dramatic earlier claims. Kelly said nothing about dead people voting. Instead, he reiterated claims he made in a lawsuit shot down by the courts that a 2019 state law expanding mail voting was unconstitutional. We've been over that one. The law passed with broad bipartisan support. It wasn't even, it's a Republican legislature, and went unchallenged until Trump lost. Perry argued that when votes are accepted under unconstitutional means without fair and equal protection for all, the only result can be an illegitimate outcome, except it wasn't the case. Perry, Kelly, Meuser, Reschenthaler were joined by fellow Pennsylvania Republicans Fred Keller, John Joyce, Lloyd Smucker, a name like that, he's got to be unconstitutional, and Glenn Thompson. In opposing their state's electoral votes, they raised their objections for weeks leading up to the vote, and again hours after a riot scarred the Capitol. They were among 138 House Republicans, 2/3 of their caucus, that voted to block the state from having a say in the election, and whatever, man. It's crazy out there. So anyway, those guys on the record, I just thought it was an interesting article and an interesting approach about how people are backing away rhetorically about their elections claims, not just about their support for objection to or protest of the vote counting. Jumping elsewhere. Oh, right. I'm still in my Pennsylvania search, which I should get rid of. Although they're, again, interesting stories. One day I'm just going to have to do a show or 10 about all the things that I've skipped over the years. All right, let's see. Rando weirdos who showed up in the Capitol and how we know who was in the Capitol. First, I guess, let me throw a broader overarching story that we didn't get to, that Greg sent me behind the scenes, and I don't think we mentioned yesterday, but maybe we did. I don't know. Parler, which, is losing its ability to operate at all because of some of the other creative pushback against the insurrectionists. I believe the most impactful of which is Amazon Web Services banning them from their cloud services, so making it extremely difficult for Parler to just operate, period. They don't have their own servers. They may move to that, but then it'll be a question of who will sell them server space. In addition to numerous accounts being erased, etc., once they realized that they were giving out personally identifying information over Parler about their having been in the Capitol, like selfies of themselves in movies and streaming over Parler. But now a much more devastating problem for them. Parler's been hacked. I cannot explain the technical aspects of it. Many of you probably can, but you probably already know them by now because it would be an exciting story to you. I think one story available from maybe Gawker is digestible in terms of what actually happened here. Oh, not Gawker. They're dead, right? Gizmodo. Similar, I think, niche. But their story is mostly about the upshot of this hack. But I guess I'll do, okay, layman's terms, what you need to know in order to understand the bigger, more interesting story from Gizmodo is somebody hacked Parler. And I don't know how, but I mean, they hacked the living crap out of it. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe they were actively trying to hack through, but they ended up with like basically administrative God level access to the whole damn thing. So in addition to the real fun stuff of being able to salvage and recover deleted posts, in fact, particularly posts that had been deleted after everybody realized, oh my God, we should prosecute everybody involved in this attack on the Capitol. Everybody realized I streamed out stuff and, over Parler, I should delete it, delete the evidence. That stuff could be recovered anyway, but if you hack Parler, it's just that much easier. Plus, there's other juicy stuff that goes along with it. By the way, another non-hack, I think, that was on Parler, and I can't tell in this stupid era we live in exactly. I can't swear to you what was going on, but what looked like was happening was somebody registered for an account on Parler and identifying themselves as the White House Pardons Office, I think, and saying, I put a message out on Parler, hey, the president wants to pardon everybody that was supporting him on Wednesday the 6th, but now it looks like the feds are going to come after you if you want to be protected. The president intends to pardon everybody who was involved in the attack. And that part is probably really true, by the way. Anyway, but this person said, if you want to be pardoned by the president in reward for your support for him, we have very little time. The president needs your name before Tuesday, so sign up here. Answer this message, parlay, as they call their tweets on Parler. Answer this with your name, address, and whatever crime it is that you committed that you think you need to be pardoned for. And we'll get it to the president right away. And I think, it seems like it was obviously some sort of trap, but people fell for it nonetheless. I mean, the people on Parler are very, very dumb for other reasons that'll come up in the Gizmodo story, as I summarize that. But yeah, they blurted out name, address, and crime I've committed. So that's not smart, and your lawyer would probably hit you over the head for that one if he agrees to even take your case. But whatever. And but then it was brought up. Some people actually thought, well, what if it is straight up real? And I had to say, wow, what if it is really straight up real? I mean, what you're asking me to believe is that the White House people, whether it's the pardons office would be attorneys, they would not do this, but somebody actually collecting information on behalf of the president or the president's request or on their own initiative, whatever, and people actually affording it to them because they believe it's getting to the president, and maybe it is going to the president. I mean, in this day and age, that could happen. They are that dumb. The other thing about Parler is, let's see. First of all, comment on the subject from Twitter follower Absinthe, listening to the show, I guess, and saying, purportedly, Parler never actually deleted stuff. They just set a flag saying it was deleted, so the hackers got everything. And then an evil laugh. I don't think it's an evil laugh. He doesn't say it's an evil laugh. But anyway, it sounds evil in my head. So that might have made things much easier for the hackers, certainly. In addition to not only the information being preserved, but being flagged as this person wants to hide this. Why? That'll come up in court, perhaps. Anyway, so all this information was found, and in addition to which, since they had such good access now, they were able to get a hold of the metadata that geotags if not the tweets or parlays or whatever themselves, and I guess they're geotagged too, but all the pictures and video and streams and whatnot are all geotagged, like really specifically with GPS coordinates down to the, to the second, as they say, right? The longitude and latitude, so many degrees, minutes, and seconds. So you can pinpoint within feet where people were. So the Gizmodo article is titled Parler Users Breached, their data was breached. Parler users breached deep inside U.S. Capitol building, GPS data shows. And it's a fascinating article. You should read it. I should read it, but we don't have time to do it. But you know what happened. And there's a map, a picture, a graphic. I don't know how accurate it is or whether it's supposed to be, to scale or whatever. It's an overhead, satellite photo of the Capitol building with red dots all over the place. And I guess each dot is supposed to represent a GPS location from which either a message or video or pictures or both or all three or whatever were sent on Parler during the times in question. And yeah, they're deep inside the Capitol. And all of that is personally identifiable. And the FBI will just basically be able to come and knock on your house and say, we found indisputable, essentially, they'll dispute it anyway, but indisputable evidence that you were inside the Capitol during this attack. And if it's a picture of you damaging something or doing something illegal on top of it all, besides just the trespass, then you're in big trouble. By the way, I guess you would have seen on Twitter at some point, and not Parler, this photo and headline alongside the tweet from Glenn Greenwald, who, for whatever reason, was tweeting in defense of everybody that should go down and all this, that there was no proof whatsoever that any of the Trump supporters involved in, discussing this thing were, inside the Capitol or on Parler. I think as people were calling for the FBI to round up the Parler information, he was saying there's no proof that Parler users were involved in this attack, and literally said it as Gizmodo was publishing probably the fourth or fifth edition or version of this story from various outlets, saying, no, there is proof. You're completely wrong on that. That won't surprise anybody at this point. It was just funny. Another angle on the story. All right, jumping back out and doing more headline jumping. Let's see. Anything? Why did I put this one away? A Jake Sherman tweet from yesterday about the magnetometers. A note from the acting sergeant at arms. Remember, the old one got booted. Mags, as they say, magnetometers, at entrance to the floor are mandatory for members. No guns on the floor. Masks also now mandatory on the floor. There is a memo from the sergeant at arms saying as much. And they still need to work out exactly what are the enforceable measures and how will Capitol Police deal with refuseniks. It's the wrong term. I mean, but it makes it sound like they're Soviet and all, because it is a Soviet term, but refuseniks were actually the victims in this case. So refusers. And the category of clever ways to get back at insurrectionists, Politico reports Harvard removes Republican Elise Stefanik. Remember that big mouth lady from the first impeachment go-round? Harvard removes Republican Elise Stefanik from advisory committee. We'll give you one paragraph on that. Stefanik was among the 147 House Republicans, I thought it was 138, who voted against certifying President-elect Joe Biden's electoral victory, I guess in the various votes in total. Anyway, the Harvard Institute of Politics removed Stefanik from its senior advisory committee in the wake of last week's deadly riot at the U.S. Capitol. You might wonder what the hell she was doing there in the first place. She's, kind of a nobody. But anyway, Harvard Kennedy School Dean Douglas Elmendorf. Do we know him from elsewhere? All right. Well, anyway, wrote in a letter released Tuesday, whatever. She sucks and she's out, and it's hilarious. And she, of course, thinks that on some level that's probably unconstitutional too. And she spent the whole day crying about it, and she never belonged there in the first place. So good riddance and creative thinking there. Lots of articles on the many, many corporations and other big spenders, politically speaking, who are have announced policies, varied policies, some good, some bad. The better ones are freezing all political donations to anyone who was involved in either cheering on or organizing the insurrection, or who voted against the certification of any of the electoral votes on Wednesday. The best and most aggressive ones that I've seen, I can't remember which company did it, we should recognize them, are doing the right thing and asking, at least in the case of Josh Hawley specifically, and maybe others to follow, for their previous contributions to be refunded. You can do that, and you should do that if you really want to kick them into pocketbook. Other companies taking an inexplicably stupid approach, and I've actually, I think initially, maybe they've changed their minds, tried to both sides it and say their reaction to the insurrection is freezing all political donations of all kinds. No, you should target it a lot better than that. Lots of other creative moves to discuss after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. I think we'll just continue on our mad scramble through as many stories as we can weave together here. I'm going to skip some of the more difficult to explain quickly stories, I think. Pardon me. Let's see. I will note for the record quickly the tweet from John McCormick. John McCormick, Washington correspondent at the National Review. Not a usual source of ours. According to a GOP source on a conference phone call yesterday, this was tweeted yesterday, so conference call on Monday. Kevin McCarthy warned members not to verbally attack colleagues who vote for impeachment because it could endanger their lives. Yes, hello. So that very interesting. McCarthy going through all sorts of contortions at the moment, apparently, and I will see if I find it. I thought I saw a report yesterday that he was polling confidants yesterday evening to ask them whether they thought he should call the president and urge him to resign. After first promising to pitch a battle against this whole thing, he too may be seeing the inevitability, at least of the impeachment. And who knows what else. So that's been very interesting as well. Let me just jump back out of this and back into Pocket and see what else I can cram in here. Interesting comment I saw also from Greg Miller, national security correspondent for the Washington Post, tweeting around one of the many excellent articles from the Post and all over the place on the details of what's emerging on Wednesday. And this debate on the impeachment is laying a lot of that stuff out. People began laying out new details yesterday. I mean, things that are going to come out over time, which also speaks to the question of timing, another major theme I should probably make my way back to about the impeachment. The question, still a bit of a fight among Democratic members of the House, rank-and-file Democrats outside of the elected ranks, activists, etc., over should impeachment have, should it have moved earlier, could it have moved earlier? We've already had that debate. And now another sub-genre of that debate, should we have used Tuesday instead of debating and passing a resolution that has no legal force, asking Mike Pence to do something about the 25th Amendment? Should we have spent that time passing the impeachment resolution? Would the one day make a difference one way or the other? I don't know. Probably not. Obviously not, as we've discussed in the past, unless there's cooperation from Republican leadership in the Senate, and that's a big question mark. But also, pushback on that has been yesterday was a hell of a day for breaking the dam on impeachment among Republicans and for the emergence of details that are going to make it increasingly uncomfortable for those Democrats who refuse to go through the hole in the dam and escape to the other side. So anyway, one such piece, the Washington Post article, a mob insurrection stoked by false claims of election fraud and promises of violent restoration. The article by Greg Miller himself, who's tweeting here, Greg Jaffe and Razan Naklawi as well. Not reading the article, but reading the comment that he tweeted, an excerpt, I think, from the article. Some Americans have traveled a path to radicalization that reminds CIA officials and everybody else in the world of the indoctrination of Islamist militants. It sure does. It's just nice to see it said and circulated in print. There will be people who are late in waking up to that fact. Let's see. Mentioned earlier, and in case you're curious and uninformed at this point, because you're behind in your reading too, like me, as to what the specifics are. You remember I mentioned that there were several warnings, current warnings of future attacks that may be launched as soon as this weekend and into and beyond the 20th. House Democrats briefed on 3 terrifying plots to overthrow the government, according to Matt Fuller over at HuffPost. Do yourself a favor and read the whole thing. Bullet point version of it is that there are plans circulating on Parler and elsewhere for attacks of various intensity, the most dramatic of which is, I hope, an overly ambitious plan to come back in the thousands, this time armed, as many insurrectionists promised they would on Wednesday of last week, but come back armed in tremendous numbers. And actually, they wanted, the plan is they would surround the Capitol grounds and actually take over control of access to and from the Capitol. That would be unconstitutional, according to the Republicans who are crying about metal detectors. But okay, at this point, the Constitution is out the window, although all of them will say that they're doing this for the Constitution. But anyway, I should stop screwing around. The idea is murdering all the Democrats and turning over control exclusively to Republicans. So, I mean, that's the bottom line of their plan. And those words are laid out explicitly in the HuffPost article. I'm not kidding. So go ahead and read it. There were 2 lesser plans. Somebody else had them like bullet pointed somewhere, and there were a lot, maybe in a tweet, a lot easier to read through quickly. But really, honestly, if that one's on the table, that's the one you should be talking about. There are others is regrettable, and we hope to foil all of them as well. But the one that you, to save time, murdering all the Democrats, I think that makes the point. Let's see. We're going to have to wait this for another day. Lots of great analysis about the various options for handling the impeachment, and maybe here at this point as well, we'll get back to that. But also one here in the New York Times. Impeachment isn't the only option against Trump. We should probably read up on that one, but we'll wait for tomorrow. Let's see. There's the one about the fines for the masks. Dems weigh how to get around an impeachment holdup to confirming Biden's nominations. Another entry in the same genre from Talking Points memo. Haven't read it. Don't know whether this is, we'll finally get around to discussions of use, just outright trial by committee, although we might moot that some point this week. Judge Ludwig, the former Fourth Circuit judge on the Court of Appeals, who was arguing, I think, ineffectively the other day on Twitter for the proposition that it was unconstitutional to impeach Trump after he leaves office, has printed an op-ed in the New York Times, I think, to that effect, and he is wrong. Is that it? Is that the impeachment? No, that's a different one. But anyway, he did print that op-ed last night. He's still wrong. He still makes a very weird and superfluous argument at some point that, the Constitution says that punishment cannot exceed removal from office and bar from future office holding. And he just leaves it at that. And it's like, what was the point of that? There's no way in which the punishment will exceed removal from office and or disqualification from future office holding. What's the problem? I mean, we've just met the definition that you laid out. Why did you lay it out if it's so obviously met on its face and cannot be exceeded? It doesn't say it can't be less than both. That we know. We've done it. And it doesn't say it can't be both because it says it can be both, and we've done both also. He glides by the Belknap case, which he may or may not already have been aware of, but I mean, is just a facial rejection of his argument. And there's an argument to be made, right? I think we kind of mentioned it just in case you have to make this or refute this argument. The argument is that even though Belknap had resigned before the impeachment committee in the House had even voted to report to the floor for floor consideration the impeachment, even before the committee finished its work, they knew. The word had gotten to them that Belknap had resigned. They said, we don't care. They went ahead with it. Then they took it to the House floor. The House said, we don't care. They voted on it. They impeached him. That's all the precedent you really need. Then they sent it to the Senate. The Senate, though, said, well, he's resigned. What do we think? The House thinks they can impeach him. Do we think we're authorized to hold a trial? And they voted, and the answer was yes. The end. They didn't convict him. And, they'll cling to this. Well, some people didn't convict him. Some of the votes said they didn't convict him because they didn't think the Senate had the authority to try him. But the answer is, you're wrong. The Senate does have the authority to try them. We already decided that. But when the threshold for conviction is 2/3, they get to have a real say. When it's majority vote, they don't. They just lose. Now, there were other analyses of this op-ed well done by the people, I think, over at Just Security. Steve Vladeck was tweeting about it last night, and he, too, had some holes in his answers, but they were good answers. But answering Judge, it's Michael Luddig is his name. I don't know if it's Lutig or Luddig, but anyway, right. He has I'm sorry, it wasn't in the New York Times, it was the Washington Post. Once Trump leaves office, the Senate can't hold an impeachment trial. I think that's the title. Well, anyway, that's the tweet that says that. Anyway, he's wrong about that. And Steve Vladeck and who else? One of his partners in blogging and podcasting say he's wrong and lay out the reasons that he's wrong. And mostly they're the same reasons that we gave. Then Vladeck says, this is interesting. Judge Luddig never addresses what purpose the disqualification power serves if officers can just resign moments before removal. And he assumes that SCOTUS would resolve a dispute without mentioning its 1993 holding, the Nixon case I told you about, that impeachment challenges are non-justiciable political questions. So that's a big hole in the thing. But then he goes on to say, indeed, the Senate has disqualified more than just one or two. They've disqualified, well, more than just one or two, but less than 4. 3 of the 8 officers that it has removed. And that's not a lot of numbers removed, but impeachment doesn't happen every day. But the Senate has disqualified 3 of the 8 officers it has removed. On this reading of the Constitution, I guess Luddig's, it didn't have the power to do that. That's how ridiculous Luddig's argument is. Luddig says that you can't hold a trial you can't try or impeach, for that matter, Trump after he's out of office, or anybody after they're out of office. And the argument is because the penalty, the automatic penalty on conviction is removal from office. The optional penalty, by the way, doable, it is argued, by majority vote only, is to bar them from future public service. But you can't just skip to the bar from future public service. That's true because it's a penalty, and you can't really enter the penalty phase, I guess, as it were, of an impeachment process until you get a conviction. And that was one of the things that I thought Vladeck glided past here. But what he's saying here, we'll get to that in a second. What he's saying is Luddig's interpretation makes no sense because in the 3 cases where officers were removed, what has to happen? What did I just say? What did I just say? It's like yelling at the kids. What did I just say has to happen first before they can decide on whether or not to bar someone from future service, they need to convict the person, right? What happens upon conviction? Conviction carries with it automatic removal. If you're convicted, you're out. But if you're out once you're convicted, how can they pass sentence barring you from future government service if Ludwig is right? Because you're now not in office. How can they sentence you under a impeachment proceeding if your conviction ends your tenure in office and now makes you not subject to, not under the jurisdiction of an impeachment court? It can't. It makes no sense. So either the 3 disqualifications are invalid and we now have to write a clause of the Constitution out, which is really going to cause problems for judges who are interested in sticking to judicial canon on things like this. You definitely don't rewrite the Constitution from the bench. But what the F, maybe you do. So that makes no sense. If you cannot, if a person out of office is not subject, you get it, right? Not subject to jurisdiction of an impeachment court, then the federal office ban is impossible to impose, a superfluous mistake included in the Constitution. And everybody knows that you get punched in the face for saying that, right? Okay. So, as he says here, Vladeck, indeed, the Senate has disqualified 3 of the 8. On Ludwig's, I should say, he says this, but Ludwig's reading of the Constitution, it didn't have the power to do that because by the time it voted to disqualify those officers, they had already been removed from their offices. That's a pretty good point, and I don't know how Ludwig is going to get around that one. It's tough. Now, there's also a few other points to get made. Now I can't find the one that I eventually made, but I think at some point he's discussing the order of the votes and how they would handle the punishment phase, and he sort of slips up, and maybe it's just misspeaking and mistyping on Twitter late at night, but he was saying that they have to have a 2/3 vote. There's a 2/3 vote for removal and then a majority vote for the bar, but really it should be pointed out, it's necessary as support for his argument that the 2/3 vote is on conviction, and there's never any vote at all on removal because the removal is automatic upon conviction. The only other vote you would take that day or any day is on the question of barring them from future government service. Anyway, Ludwig's got it wrong, and he also, not in addition to rendering a part of the Constitution's impeachment clauses a nullity for no reason and against all logic, he also clings to this argument, when he could be much more succinct. Don't make arguments that are superfluous and don't make any sense if you want to write a good, tight opinion, whether in the Washington Post or from the bench. And the idea of holding up the impeachment clauses and saying there's a specific prohibition against exceeding the punishment exceeding removal from office and barring them from future federal office, and nobody proposes that for Trump, and there's no way to do it for Trump. Why make that objection if there's nothing of the sort even possible or proposed? I mean, I think we should all be able to kick him in the nuts, but that's not constitutional. And, I'm not going to actually try and plan that because that could get you in trouble, whatever. So we don't. Lots of pushback, by the way, speaking of which, against the Snopes debunking of the taser guy, including some great T-shirt designs circulated last night by Neil S., who tweets as Panem Dolores, who says, I know Snopes said the story is not real, but frankly, I need something to believe in. Gave it the KITM hashtag and everything. I retweeted it last night. I will include it in the roundup. And I think appropriately wordy T-shirt. It's a right-wing T-shirt. I love my husband who passed away storming the Capitol of a heart attack. The loony left says he tased his ballsack. However, this was proven false by Snopes.com. And that's about how a conservative T-shirt would go, except that I think every other word should be a hashtag just to be correct and appropriate. All right. Let's see. Other things the timing. We never really did get around to the timing. I know Armando's been upset this morning, and been his theory. He does not trust Mitch McConnell, and you shouldn't, that he will really move a quick impeachment trial and start early. There still remains that possibility. Once they pass the articles of impeachment today, there are 2 points at which they can pause proceedings and prevent the Senate from starting before they want to. You remember what they were. One, the delivery of those articles, and you'll recall for the first impeachment from last year that they delayed in the delivery of those articles and successfully got the timing they wanted. And 2, that Senate impeachment rules require or establish as the key trigger for the Senate action, at which point their schedule becomes dictated to them, is the announcement of from the House to the Senate that they have appointed managers for the impeachment and that they are ready to present the articles of impeachment. Last night, Pelosi made an announcement informally naming her choices for impeachment managers. And it's a nice lineup. It's different from last time. And Jamie Raskin sits at the top up there. So I can't really review all the names necessarily in terms of their quality as members, but the list is out there and I can include it in one of the roundups. If it happens to pop up quick, I can read it to you. But her naming them isn't the same thing as the House passing a resolution officially naming them. So that hasn't been done yet, but it doesn't look like they plan to delay on that. So that causes some concern. I guess the big concern is, could McConnell now say, okay, I will reconvene the Senate under the emergency powers that I have available to me, and he's got them, and Schumer will agree. And then I'm going to double cross you. The Republicans plan to hold a sham 1-minute trial and dismiss the charges, and then adjourn again and run away until the 19th or 20th. Could they do it? Yes. Is it disastrous if they do? It's not optimal, but let me just remind everybody, there is no double jeopardy protection for impeachment or with respect to anything having to do with impeachment. That is a protection under criminal law in the U.S. This is not a criminal charge. It's not a court. You can absolutely impeach an official in office, out of office, whatever, over and over again on the same charges and just retry it until you get, if you wanted to, you could just keep retrying it until you get a Senate favorable to their removal or barring them from office at some point, depending on their timing there. Would you? Has never been done. Would be considered an enormous waste of time, probably, unless, insurrection. Not a waste of time to prosecute that. But, floor time is extremely valuable in both houses, and there's the political optics of it. The Republicans would, of course, immediately complain, oh, my God, the answer was no. Stop trying on all this. But in a situation where everyone witnesses Republicans breaking in favor of impeachment, McConnell hinting at it, and then double-crossing and holding what is obviously not a sufficient consideration and a sufficient trial to mock the whole process and dismiss it 7 to 10 days before he loses the majority leader position and loses the control of the Senate, probably doesn't go over that well. And I think they actually would get away with simply saying, no. You don't get to bury this thing forever. We're just going to bring it back when you're gone. And they very well might. It might take some of the steam out of things. You don't want it to happen. You want to know exactly what's going to happen. But it wouldn't be the end of the world if he pulled the double cross somehow on all of this. Can't put it past McConnell, but I don't know. I don't know if that's what's going on. All right. Let's see. Other things. Speaking of pardons and impeaching people after they've left office, our Twitter pal Jimbotron tweeted yesterday, and I never did get to shoehorn it into yesterday's show. Recent events have given you the chance to discuss corruption of blood. Don't let it pass you by. Actually, we kind of could get around to corruption of blood. One of the various illegal and unconstitutional bills of attainder prohibited by our own Constitution, but have history and in British common law and constitutional law, the unwritten constitution. Attainder, as we define it, and I guess everybody defines it, but I don't know about everybody else. I know about us. Bills of attainder are unconstitutional. What are they? They are bills that specifically call out and punish individuals, particularly without legal due process, but a number of other things. But yes, Wikipedia has a nice definition for you. Where do they have a U.S. section here? No, but generally speaking, in English criminal law, attainder was the metaphorical stain or corruption of blood which arose from being condemned of a serious capital crime like felony or treason. It entailed losing not only one's life, not necessarily a part of this thing here, but property and hereditary titles, but also typically the right to pass those on to one's heirs. That's the corruption of blood thing. You pay for the crimes of your parents. We didn't like that very much, and we also don't like the idea of Congress acting to target individuals. Sometimes we do come very close on things, and there are court cases about it. But some have alleged that a impeachment trial after Trump leaves office that has as its only penalty that's still available to us the bar from future federal office holding. People say, well, that's a bill of attainder. This is an act by the Congress that targets a single individual, but it doesn't count as a bill of attainder under our interpretation of things. It's a specific power, and obviously it's supposed to be directed at particular individuals. It's just a misreading of the Constitution, just like they always do, and telling them they're wrong is a violation of their First Amendment rights. All right. So anyway, I think we've got the basics of the timing out of the way as well. It looks, I can't tell. I don't know. I haven't kept up on what their plans are. I'll find out afterwards whether they're going to just send these articles of impeachment over right away. I don't know if they have an agreement in place, but I can't believe that Pelosi would just let them go if they didn't. But hey, you never know. Not everybody knows what's going on. I also have been worried about something else. I took a look at the first draft, anyway, of the impeachment resolution. There's have to be at least one technical correction to Raskin's 25th Amendment resolution from yesterday that I happened to see Jerry Nadler make in the rules. But I just have one concern, and it might be nothing, and I just hope that people have looked at it. Because we're talking about possibly impeaching or holding the trial after Trump leaves office as a possibility. And there's this argument now circulating, you can't impeach a president after he's left office or anybody after they've left office. Some people do one or the other. Some argue both. And then, of course, the question is addressed apparently in McConnell's memo, or the memo to McConnell. One question they agree is settled is that the Chief Justice would not preside over the trial of a president who's left office who's being impeached. And I know John Roberts is probably relieved about that. But then, of course, I've been advancing the idea that you could, like a judicial impeachment, handle this trial in committee. And you can. And especially you can. Now, the McConnell memo and a few other arguments have said it was never the intention to handle a presidential impeachment in committee, and it's probably not, even though I guess technically you could do it and just have it's a special committee that they appoint. I don't know what the authority to appoint the Chief Justice to a committee of the Senate really is, but the Senate, they're the arbiter of their own rules. They could do it if they wanted to, but they think, and I tend to agree, that should be done on the floor of the House. But what if Republicans argue that his impeachment trial is invalid if conducted in committee because he's a president? Well, he was a president. He isn't one now. Well, I wanted the impeachment resolution to account for that possibility. The styling of the resolution and the title is a resolution impeaching Donald John Trump, President of the United States. The usual styling for impeaching somebody who is, as he is now, currently president, even though, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, point is, I thought that, you could solve and head off potential objections and court cases later and whatever else, other problems. Just stick an A in there. Impeaching Donald John Trump, a president of the United States. He's one now. He was one, if you're speaking from the future, and we're impeaching him because he isn't one now, but we're impeaching him over acts that took place when he was one. But we're definitely allowed to be in committee for this trial if we want to now, because all he is a president, and he isn't the president. And I thought that was an easy change. I haven't heard whether or not they want to do that. I think some people have pushed back, but I'm not 100% sure they're clear on the concept that I'm actually trying to argue here. I hope that doesn't arise at some late moment and F everything up, because if that happens, I'm going to be extremely pissed. But then we'll have a good show to talk about it. I told you so. Just as I told you that admitting Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert to the House was a slow-motion assassination plot. Everyone now coming to that realization. Late, of course. Anyway, by the way, if you're looking to keep score at home and wondering just how is it possible that there might ever be a conviction, I want to remind you of Carl Bernstein's tweet from November 22nd, claiming that there were 21 Republican senators who had privately expressed their disdain for Trump to him.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, I should be dedicating this time to Justice Putnam, who's coming up next, but you want to remember a reminder of who those 21 senators are? Portman, Alexander, Sass, Blunt, Collins, Murkowski, Cornyn, Thune, Romney, Brown, Young, Tim Scott, Rick Scott, Rubio, Grassley, Byrd, Toomey, McSally, Moran, Roberts, and Shelby. Some of them are gone, but interesting. See you tomorrow.